Hook, start every story with this style. He was rich, cold, untouchable. A man who owned everything except warmth. His mansion stood like a fortress against the world, his heart sealed shut by time and wealth. But that night, something pierced his shell. Something quiet, almost invisible. A sound. A movement. A presence in the dark. Then he saw her. A child, his adopted daughter, crouched in the kitchen, trembling as she ate from a dog ball. At first, he froze in disgust. But then she looked up, and what she said next, so innocent, so broken, shattered every belief he'd built his life on. Let's begin. Ache. The cold mansion. Something feels off. The Bentley rolled through the iron gates of the Wexford estate, headlights slicing through the misty dusk as the millionaire, Charles Alden, returned home earlier than usual. His staff didn't expect him. The mansion didn't either. Inside, everything felt calculated. Marble floors that echoed shoe loudly, glass chandeliers that caught no joy in their reflection, and air so conditioned it felt dead. The silence was not just physical, it was emotional. Charles walked past polished sculptures and untouched furniture, his footsteps sharp against the emptiness. His housekeeper was off. His son away at boarding school. His wife long gone. And then, something, just something, felt off. A subtle wrongness. Like a misplaced breath in a symphony. He paused in the main hallway, the weight of something invisible pulling his eyes toward the left wing. He didn't know what drew him there, perhaps instinct, or guilt dressed as curiosity, but he followed the pull. He passed rooms filled with wealth but starved of soul. Then he saw it, a light on under the kitchen door, faint but alive. Odd, considering no one should have been there. He moved closer, slowly, his pulse rising not with fear but confusion. The handle was slightly warm. He turned it quietly, preparing to scold a maid for negligence. But what waited behind that door would be no minor mistake. What waited would unravel him. Though. The disturbance, what was that noise? The door creaked open, and at first, Charles saw nothing, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the moonlight filtering through the glass ceiling. Then, a sound. Wet, rhythmic. Chewing. Not from a human plate. He stepped in fully, his polished shoes silent on the stone floor, and that's when he saw the silhouette. Small. Curled. Hidden between the kitchen island and the pantry cabinet. As he stepped closer, the figure flinched. It was his daughter, Amara. 8 years old. Adopted. Forgotten. Her small hands held a dented dog food can, half empty. Her lips were covered in gravy. Her eyes, wide and frozen, looked up at him like she had been caught in a crime. He couldn't speak. She had opened the can herself, spoon nowhere in sight. She was eating with her hands. Her school clothes were still on, wrinkled and stained. A faint tremble ran through her body. Charles was paralyzed. Amara? He finally managed. She blinked. Wiped her mouth with her sleeve. He stared, a dozen questions screaming inside him. Where's the nanny? Why is she alone? Why dog food? She stared back in silence, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to answer. And then he heard her whisper, soft and cracked like paper, I thought this was mine. That single sentence cut deeper than anything he'd ever heard. She wasn't hungry. She wasn't mischievous. She was conditioned to believe she deserved less. And he was the one who taught her that. Not with words, but with absence. Teen. The confrontation, why are you doing this? Charles knelt, something he hadn't done in years, his expensive knees grinding against the cold tiles. Amara, he said again, voice softer. Why are you doing this? She looked at him with those eyes that had forgotten how to expect kindness. I got hungry, she whispered. But I didn't want to make anyone mad. The fridge is always locked after 6. His brows furrowed. Locked. He hadn't known. These staff must have assumed rules for all children, even if some were invisible. Why didn't you ask? He asked, pain leaking into his voice. She paused. I did. Once. But Miss Sharon said I wasn't real family. Real family eats upstairs. Her fingers tightened around the can. The dog food wasn't locked. He felt like vomiting. This was the product of his silence. His distance. His absence signed off on her hunger. Amara, he said again, but she was already scooting backward, afraid he would yell. He didn't. Couldn't. And then she said it, the sentence that shattered the room like glass dropped from heaven. I didn't think anyone would notice if I was gone. Time stopped. Those 12 words didn't just break his heart, they rewrote it. Char. The backstory, how did things get this bad? 1,000 memories slammed into Charles' mind like a flood through locked doors. He remembered the day he adopted her, or rather, signed the papers. His late wife had insisted on it, a gesture of goodwill after their first daughter died. He never held Amara in the hospital. Never learned her bedtime routine. He paid for the best nannies, the finest tutors, and the safest toys, but he never once picked one out himself. He remembered birthdays he skipped, bedtime stories he never told, and a school art show he left halfway through for a board meeting. Amara had been present in his house but absent from his heart, a background character in his high-stakes life. He remembered overhearing her ask the housekeeper once, "Do I get a stocking for Christmas too?" and how the housekeeper replied with a shrug. He remembered brushing it off. He remembered thinking kids were resilient. But now, looking at her, shrunken, silent, eating dog food out of guilt and fear, he realized she hadn't been resilient. She'd been invisible. And it wasn't the staff's fault. Not fully. He had set the tone. His home had followed his example. And that example had told a little girl she didn't matter. Punch. The realization, I failed. Charles stood, but something in him remained kneeling. Not physically, spiritually. His heart bent under the weight of his own blindness. The walls of his mansion, once proud and tall, now felt like tombstones. How could he be so precise in business, so exacting in investments, yet so careless in fatherhood? He had failed. Spectacularly. Not in the loud ways, not in abuse or cruelty, but in the quiet neglect that leaves permanent bruises. He looked around the kitchen and saw the child-proof fridge lock, the towering pantry, the absence of her drawings on the fridge, the lack of photos with her in the frames. Every item screamed exclusion. He imagined her watching the family dog eat while she waited in silence. He imagined her eating alone, cold dinners left by maids who were paid to care but never truly did. He pressed a hand to his chest, something twisting inside. This wasn't guilt anymore. This was grief. Grief for time lost. For moments missed. For a child who should have been loved out loud. He didn't cry, not yet. But something inside him cracked. And through that crack, light began to pour in. The first step, I want to fix this. Charles didn't call for the maid. He didn't summon a chef. He walked to the fridge, typed in the code himself, and opened it. The cold air hit him like shame. He pulled out eggs, bread, and butter. He didn't know how to cook much, but French toast. He remembered making that once, long ago, for his first daughter. He moved clumsily, burning the first slice, but Amara watched from the corner, silently intrigued. He didn't speak, afraid to scare her away. He plated the toast, poured syrup like it was sacred, and walked toward her. Slowly, gently. It's not dog food, he said softly, offering the plate. She hesitated. Then, inch by inch, she reached for it. Her hands were still sticky. He didn't flinch. He let her take it. She sat on the floor, curling her legs under her like she always did in the corners of rooms. He sat beside her, suit and all, letting his body rest where his soul had just begun to awaken. They didn't talk. She ate slowly, cautiously, but she ate. And he watched every bite like it was holy. Sat. The connection. They eat together for the first time. Charles had never sat on the kitchen floor before, not even during the house's construction. But tonight, with syrup dripping off a cracked plate and his adopted daughter beside him, it became sacred ground. Amara didn't speak much, just tiny nods, soft glances. But something had changed. When he refilled her glass with water, her fingers brushed his. She didn't pull away. That moment, brief, electric, was more powerful than any contract he'd ever signed. She looked up at him. Really looked. And for the first time, she didn't see a stranger. She saw a man trying. He noticed the way she chewed slower now, no longer afraid someone would take the food. He asked her if she liked French toast. She nodded. It's sweet, she whispered. Not like dog food. A tear slipped down his cheek, and he let it. He didn't wipe it away. Amara didn't comment on it, but she leaned a little closer. He didn't move. He let the silence stretch, warm and thick. For the first time, they weren't Millionaire and Charity case. They were father and daughter. Uneven. Healing. But finally, beginning. Art. The turning point. This will never happen again. The next morning, the staff found Charles in the kitchen at 6 a.m., removing the fridge lock with a screwdriver. He called a meeting, one that included everyone. The chefs, the maids, the security staff, even the gardeners. He didn't yell. He explained. Firmly. Passionately. From now on, Amara eats with me. She sleeps in the room next to mine. No more codes. No more silence. The staff nodded, some ashamed, some shocked. Then he did something even more surprising. He cancelled his flight to Zurich. $1 billion merger could wait. His daughter could not. He ordered a child-sized dining chair and placed it at the head of the table. He asked Amara what her favorite color was. She said yellow. He repainted her room that week. When the press asked where he'd been, he said, home. Where I should have been all along. That was the turning point. Not just for her, for him. The mansion didn't feel like a museum anymore. It became a house. Then a home. Then a heartbeat. No. The final scene, hope begins. The sun rose gently through yellow curtains. Charles sat on the porch, holding 2 mugs, one hot chocolate, one coffee. Amara came out in her slippers, sat beside him, and took the mug meant for her. She didn't speak, didn't have to. He handed her a small note, folded neatly. She opened it. Inside, in his messy handwriting, were 3 words she never expected. You are mine. She smiled. He smiled back. And for the first time, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full, of trust, of healing, of hope.